Hi, welcome to this video called What is Charmed Kubernetes? My name is Alex Jones, welcome to Cloud Native Skunkworks. I'm an engineering director at Canonical and I look after the Kubernetes teams. I wanted to make this video today because I believe that there is a lot of mysticism and perhaps mystery around what is Charmed K8s and why should we be excited about it. And I wanted to share how you get started, some of the key features and what are the differentiators around it. So, let's get looking at the composition straight away. Effectively, what Charmed K8s is a set of composable charms that allows you to deploy but also manage Kubernetes from day 0 to day 2. So it's not KubeADM, it's not an operator that just runs to keep things ticking over. It's all of that plus the transport and delivery mechanism as well, which sounds really cool when you put it together, and it almost sounds overwhelming to think of all those things that it can do. But the real key to this is that Charmed Kubernetes is based on something called Juju, and Juju is effectively an operator framework as well as a controller system to deploy out infrastructure. So this could be equivocal to Terraform or Ansible, but then it also manages the life cycle of those components. So you could be installing something like a systemd service on Ubuntu with Juju, or you could be installing something inside of a Kubernetes cluster like a workload. So this is why Juju is a really important part of Charmed K8s. But Charmed K8s itself is the collection of composed charms, and these charms are effectively application workloads inside the K8s cluster and machine level components. So think about your CNI binaries, your configuration settings for Ubuntu, and other bits and pieces. So let's draw that out, because that probably sounded like quite a lot of information to consume right there. So if you imagine we have our host operating system, which in this case will be Ubuntu. And let's say that Ubuntu is either in the cloud, it could be on bare metal. That doesn't really matter for this particular video. What we have is a differentiation of effectively machine charms. So machine charms. Now these charms you can find on Charmhub. An example of a machine charm might be Ceph, which is installing at the Ubuntu level. These machine charms enable you to orchestrate and control these Ubuntu machines remotely, right? And then with Juju you can also stand up Ubuntu itself because it integrates with MAS and OpenStack. But for our simplified example, we would pretend that Juju is controlling what's going on. And there's some more Juju concepts that I'll get into in a moment. So Juju effectively can deploy and manage these machine charms, and what it can also do is deploy and manage Kubernetes charms. Now there's a missing piece here. That is, where does Charmed Kubernetes come in? Well, Charmed Kubernetes is a collection of charms, as I mentioned, but they're not just machine charms and not just Kubernetes charms. The machine charms, for the sake of simplicity, will be charms like control plane, and that control plane, let's say in this example we have a three-way control plane, which is HA. If I can select this properly. So that is a key component of Charmed K8s. And then we also have the worker nodes as well. Of course, there'll be other components such as EasyRSA. Again, there is terminology that I'm going to steer away from just for now, but we have things such as subordinates, which are like relations, and we have subcharms and things like that, but we'll keep away from that terminology just whilst we get our head around the conceptual part of it now. So yeah, we've got these components here. Let's just change that to match these others. There we go. Change that color to black. So that's the sort of the substrate that forms up Charmed K8s, but then it's much more. It's a set of CSI and CNI. It's also an SMI. So all the interoperable layers of K8s are part of the Charmed Kubernetes ecosystem. And so the next question you might ask is, well, what differentiates this from just doing a Helm install or just doing a kubectl install? And that's where we come back to the Juju concept again, and we understand that Juju isn't just about wrapping YAML files, it's actually a programmatic-based view on how you would manage services. And there's a secondary part of that I'll get into a bit later called relations. So effectively, Charmed Kubernetes is a collection of machine-based charms and Kubernetes-based charms. So we'll call this Charmed Kubernetes. Why is this powerful and why is this useful? Well, let's look at the power of it straight up. I am going to deploy a cluster out. So let me just go Juju status. I've connected Juju to AWS. So what does that mean? That effectively means I have a controller deployed in AWS. I said I was going to go through the concepts. Juju uses controllers and models. These are the key primitives that you need to think about. That controller could live on my local machine. That controller could live on a VM in GCP. It could live on a VM in AWS. In this particular scenario, it lives in AWS in a VM somewhere inside my VPC. And this controller is able to provision the components that I need. Another Juju paradigm is called a model. The cardinality between a controller to a model is a controller can have many models. Think of a model as an application or a set of applications or workloads that you want to deploy. So in this example, I have a default model that comes with it. So let's call this default. That default model could be anything. It could be a VM I want to stand up. It could be a Kubernetes cluster. It could be something else. In this case, there's nothing in my model. So I go Juju list controllers. I have my default controller here, which is AWS EU West 2. And then if I go Juju status or Juju list models, I have my default model inside my controller. At the moment, this model isn't bounded around all this Kubernetes stuff that I've drawn, but it will be. So now that I have the default controller, which is here, with my default model selected, what do I want to fill inside of this box? Well, I want to run Juju deploy Charmed K8s. So Juju deploy Charmed Kubernetes. And that will give me all of these pieces. It's going to stand up the virtual machines. It's going to install the components necessary for K8s to run. And this will be an HA setup. So first and foremost, I used KubeADM as an example. Another one you might be thinking about is like, oh, well, you know, this is like Kops or this is like KubeSpray. There are some similarities. It does pull down the upstream, but the differentiators grow more as you look into it. The charms themselves are curated in the canonical concept of tracks and channels. A bit like with Snap, or you might have seen that if you were working on Ubuntu, you do a Snap install and you see you have different channels for releases, you know, stable, edge, latest, etc. And the idea is that revisions get pushed on these channels and these tracks and enable you to take updates seamlessly. It's the same concept in that the charms, in many cases, these machine charms, will have snaps inside of them. And so you'll be getting seamless streamed updates into your cluster. Another big differentiator here is that by using Juju and using Charmed K8s within that, you can do seamless updates, which is really, really nice. I don't want to overload too many of these concepts right now because I know there's a lot of stuff to think about. But effectively, we've just deployed a 9-node Kubernetes cluster because it's now got a completely entirely independent etcd database cluster running, and it's also got a load balancer that's independent as well. So if we want to see what's going on, we can run Juju status, and this should give us a bit of an idea. And so now that we've got our cluster set up, let's just validate that we can actually connect to it. Fantastic. So as you can see, we have some default workloads already scheduled. And this is one of those terminology things where I would effectively phrase the out-of-the-box stuff as your L1 of foundational components, and then you have L2, which are the applications you may want to install as a user. And these could be charms. These could also be non-Juju workloads. So this could be stuff from the wider ecosystem. The nice thing about this is whilst we're opinionated, it's also very open, right? So you could use Helm and kube control as well within your cluster. Juju doesn't have strong feelings about that, right? So you could deploy something else out. The nice thing, and the thing that we really care about, is the foundational integrity of your cluster and making sure that the interoperability of the baseline components is extremely solid, they're getting updates, they're tested, and they're secure. So for me, Charmed Kubernetes really has a very strong value proposition in that it's not a fire and forget. It's not like running Kops and then sort of reading some docs and doing an upgrade every now and again. You very much get all the benefit of the individual components being aligned to the snap tracks and therefore receiving revision updates dynamically. When you're using something like OpenStack, Ubuntu, and then putting K8s on top of it, if you're using something like the control plane from Charmed Kubernetes, you know that its constituent parts are being kept up to date and that you have a more cohesive security plan there in terms of how you do those updates. In addition to this, because Juju also manages things like OpenStack, you can gracefully upgrade the entire node, including Ubuntu itself, and manage that in sync with K8s, which is something that I think traditionally folks would say, okay, well, we're just going to drain the node and then restart the operating system and let things come back into life, and then we will uncoordinate again. And this just allows you to do that dance a little bit nicer. There are other things too. With COS, which is Canonical Observability Stack, you have that as a new option, being able to be baked in to have the appropriate level of observability for your cluster, or at least a sensible level of defaults, so that you'll have stuff like Loki that is already plumbed in at the system level, which is really interesting to me, especially where you could take that, combining things like syslog as well. I think that the direction that we're going to start taking this, and at least the ambition that I have for this year, is to really advocate that Charmed Kubernetes is a platform for Kubernetes that takes pure upstream. It doesn't butcher it or start putting in very strongly opinionated systems that don't give you any wiggle room. Rather, it augments it. It adds lots of operators that add value, and it has high quality channels for delivering open source projects to your team. And I think that's the really important thing, is that it is a really high fidelity delivery channel for Kubernetes, and therefore for you and your workloads. What's also worth covering is that you saw me do a very simple Juju deploy Charmed Kubernetes, but part of the power is that you can apply overlays to change the configuration and behavior. And so if you're a particular customer who requires, say, an advanced CNI, you can modify the default CNI from Flannel to Calico to something else. Equally, you can change out the storage solution, and it's not just, hey, I'm going to grab this file off of the internet and install it. It's a fully curated charm that effectively has a lifecycle management within it because of the Juju controller that is managing it. And that gives you some security in the fact that it's been curated as part of our ecosystem, but also it'll be leveraging the relations system, so that if you apply a relation from the database to a workload, you will be able to set up things such as secrets, users, and access tokens, for example. It's a really powerful and important idiom that is going to become more enhanced through the more charms that are on the hub and the more relations that we can create between them. So thank you for bearing with me and watching me deploy out a Charmed Kubernetes cluster. I hope that it's a little bit clearer now that Charmed K8s is effectively a collection of charms, and these charms can be things like snaps. They can also be operator behavior that will implement something at the infrastructure level or deploy a workload and then manage that workload. And the interesting thing to me is that it provides you the day two operations that you wouldn't necessarily get elsewhere. I think that it's really unique within the ecosystem, and I'm excited because you have MicroK8s on one end of the spectrum with its very low op approach. Then you also have Charmed MicroK8s with its highly composable approach. So I feel like there is a really good ability to cater for a wide variety of product needs. So again, please do like and subscribe. Any comments, please do let me know, and I'll see you soon.